First pose, when I'm taking and drawing, I have no interest in terms of copying the model. I'm trying to feel the action of the pose. I'm taking and analyzing the action. So as I'm going through the figure, whether it's a 1-minute pose, a 5-minute pose, or a 3-hour pose, I approach them exactly the same. I'm trying to feel the flow of how the figure goes. So, of how the pose through the when I'm okay in this first pose, when I'm taking and drawing, I have no interest in terms of copying the model. I'm trying to feel the action of the pose. I'm taking and analyzing the action. So as I'm going through the figure, whether it's a 1-minute pose, a 5-minute pose, or a 3-hour pose, I approach them exactly the same. I'm trying to feel the flow of how the figure goes. So the process then is one of getting the total, and I start every pose literally the same way. I'm constantly drawing anatomy. So now as I go back into this, once I've gotten the overall general sense of the action, then I come back in and start to focus on the volume, going across the form, containing. Now in this pose I'm taking, and instead of starting with the head, which I normally do, I'm taking, again, feel the flow through. I'm going across the surface of the form, feel the movement. I'm leading the eye with the lines. I want you to take and experience what it is that I'm seeing in terms of the action. So I create movement. As I say, I never copy the model. Now I'm coming back in and start to think of the volume a little more clearly. Come through, going over the surface of the form, feeling, basically in a sense, drawing cylinders, coming in and back in. I have no qualms about changing the pose. Okay. Now, really feeling the way that torso is coming out. So I'll go across the form to show the direction and space, going back into the pelvis, going over, following through. The line is taking and carrying me through the figure so that I'm experiencing it. So the line is doing what my brain is doing. I'm trying to understand what the action is, and I'm only concerned with the action. So as I have time, I will take and come back in and start to deal with the volume. Through. Taking and focusing on directions and space as well. Okay. Now you notice that each of the drawings pretty much start the same way. What you want to do is have this as sort of a pattern that you get in your head. You're training your neurons as you're going through the figure. Through. Now, this is very much the way I take and approach taking in when I'm out sketching in the wild. I take and first capture the action, and then take and go back. As I have time, I will take and go back and refine the elements, give more information, not so much refine, but clarify what I've got going. A very, very traditional approach. It's less of it's obviously not copying, so it's not what we would call contemporary academic approach. Okay. Now, in this pose, what we're having is a way, the way she's suspending herself, but it's a rather subtle play as the body is actually going back in space. So that becomes a critical element in the drawing. I think across the pelvis, come up, legs, pulling through, going underneath. We build, feel the shoulders pushing up, coming down. I look to where we're placement on the ground, where the other leg is coming through. Now, again, going back, feeling the rib cage, feeling the belly, coming through, feeling the corners of the pelvis, coming across, and round over the surface. And as we do longer poses, but then we would take and be carrying this a bit farther. Now, a 2-minute pose gives us a little bit more time. Notice I do not start any different. Still doing exactly the same thing. As I'm coming through, and feel the flow. Notice how I'm leading the eye with the lines as I'm going through the figure. The lines aren't duplicating shapes that we see in the model. It's really the action that I'm taking and drawing. So going through, now I'm going back over the surface, feeling the direction in space. Same time, containing, going over. Feeling the pinch is taking place. Picking up the back of the sacrum, coming in, going over the surface, going over. Now going back in here, I want to feel that pinch a little bit more clearly. Going through, around, constantly going over the surface, clarifying where the forms are in space. Now feel the pinch, neck, shoulder coming forward. I want to think of the scapula pushing up. So as I have time, then I go back in and I start to clarify. We can take and add a little bit more to this. And progressively, as we deal with longer poses, you'll find more information being added as I go through the drawing. I go over the surface. I'm always going across the form to give a sense of the volume. As I go back through a drawing, I take and try to give more of a sense of the 3D and the anatomy as I'm going along. Okay, now, again, pull. Also notice the scale of the drawings I'm doing. There's really no practical reason for taking and doing really large drawings. And also you'll notice that even though these are short poses, I don't really draw very fast, but I'm very deliberate about the way I'm going about it, so that there's very little movement of my hands extraneously. I'm not moving my arms completely around all the time. I'm very directed in the way I approach the drawing. Basically following through the figure. I'm not doing any particular, like for instance, measuring. I just use the eye and the feeling of the flow as I go through. Also, the lines that I put down are not restricted to, say, a contour. In fact, none of the lines to begin with are particularly contour lines. They're lines that indicate the action of the figure rather than the shape of the figure. although it's very clear, you can see very clearly what the action is and how I build the form up. Feeling the tension, start to feel the pinch, start to build. Also, I pay very little attention in the beginnings to the particular light source that we have in the drawing. Okay. I get the question is, do I always start with the head? Basically, yes. The head is what everything else is, follows from the head. It's the pressures, all of the parts move with the head. So I'm not drawing a shape particularly, I'm drawing an action. And so there I'm concerned with how the parts relate to each other. So in that sense, I focus on the head to begin with, because that takes and gives us a lead to what the action of the rest of the figure is doing. Also, my approach to drawing is really the end result, or the end goal is to take and be able to draw from imagination. So the approach that I'm pursuing then is applicable to taking and drawing from imagination. It's also very, very traditional. It's a Renaissance approach to drawing rather than an academic approach. So in that sense, it's really a very, very traditional drawing. Going over the surface. I want to feel the pinch, how the forms are compressing. Like I said, I have no qualms about adjusting, changing things to making it stronger. Feeling the push up on the rib cage or the scapula there, going around. Yeah. Constantly adjusting. Now here I can see I'm going to come back and pull this in a bit more. Feel the rib cage going in. I look for condyles, look at the end of the bone, look at the wrists. Okay, now let's start. Feel the pull. And here, for instance, I would be going into the spine, and I'm trying to lead the eye with the lines. So I take now and come back, pulling out, over the surface, coming across. Pull over, feeling that shoulder, arm. Often when I have a situation like hands like that, I would actually come out and draw the placement of the hands very early, and then take and add the arms as a connection. Now I come back in, I want to feel the rib cage, feel the stomach, think of the pelvis, feel the pulling, going over the surface, round. Now, you'll find that if you look at art history and go back, and you're going to see very, very consistent. If you look at the way artists work and the way they develop their paintings, you're going to feel an awful lot of drawing that has a strong affinity to exactly what I'm doing. Or look at the drawings of a Daumier, Heinrich Kley. These are artists that are looked upon as examples, and particularly in the animation industry. Okay, now in this pose, a little different in that we have such extreme foreshortening. I will take and right away I'll start to work with simple spherical forms leading back into the picture. So in drawing, we have basic tools that we use, but we always change according to the lay of the land. In other words, we approach the drawing what seems to be the most rational way of taking and approaching it for the given situation that we're working in. So here, although I'm drawing a little small here, still going over the surface, fitting things in. I'm looking at where the corners of the form, the fact that we're overlapping, going in. The arm is going in, so going over the surface. The way I draw over the surface like this, it would be interesting, or I should say educational, to take a look at the drawings of, say, a Da Vinci. And you find that this is a very, very basic element. Or even the Michelangelo, we take and come through. And the idea of terms of measuring, Michelangelo is the one who said, don't measure, use the eye. And so I rely on the eye rather than measuring, and particularly in a quick pose. We don't really have time to take and spend a lot of time measuring. I use, particularly when I'm working with a pen, I use a lot of crosshatch as a means of taking and describing where the forms there are in space, dropping forms back. That's a pretty funny looking hand there. Now, before we get started here, this is a Faber-Castell Polychromo, and it's a Royal Sanguine. Okay, now, it's the same as when I was dealing with the shorter poses. Now, this is still short, but I'm still taking and following through. I started with the head and feel the flow figure. At the same time now, I'm taking and thinking, going across the form as it goes back in space. I'm going over the surface. I'm always drawing anatomy. So I'm really trying to feel and construct an anatomy, construct, feel the flow of how it's going. So I'm drawing now exactly the same way I did when I was drawing with the pen. There's really no difference. And as I go back into this, then each time I go back into the drawing, I carry it a bit farther. And I'm always adjusting, correcting myself. Now it's gone through. Now I want to focus on the 3D volume containing form. So I'm going from one side to the other as I pull through. And generally I work very light. And so I'm pulling one form fitting into the other. It's a simple cylinder type form. That point was the end of the iliac crest. I come through and I start to feel the way the leg is pulling out. Essentially just a simple cylinder to start with. I'm at the end of the knee, through, over the surface. Feel the buttocks on the back side there. Again, going over. Through. Now, as I'm doing this, I basically only have several essential hand movements. I'm going across the form, I'm pulling a line, and the other part is I'm containing, I'm going round, over, across the form, and containing. Now I've gone through the drawing twice already. So as I go back into it, each time now as I go back into the drawing, I carry it a little bit farther. Okay, she has breasts, so let's put those in. Now, at this point, I'm starting to take in really a little bit more care. Coming in, going over the surface of the form, fitting in. Feel the pull coming across and going underneath. Okay, so now as I'm going in, I'm trying to constantly fit. Notice I'm going over the surface. I'm pulling the form, creating a sense of volume, then coming across. So I come out to the end of the knee. I'm going across the form. And in essence, this is if you've looked at any of my other stuff, you'll see the idea with box forms, cylinders, spheres. So this was essentially bringing in the box form. I want to feel the compression that's taking place at this point, going over the surface. Now, this is just a 5-minute pose. I don't take and concentrate at all about whether I finish the drawing. It's not going to be a finished drawing. All I'm doing is trying to explain clearly what it is at that point that I'm actually drawing. So I want to communicate or understand the pose. So this is the critical part. It's not copying. I'm trying to analyze the action and the forms as they come through. Coming across, feel the heel, coming in, over, through. Now, again, going over. I'm going to feel the belly going down, going over the surface. Constantly using lines going across the surface, going back in, through. Now here I want to take and feel more so than you actually see in the model. I'm going to take and push the scapula up, give it a little bit more tension, feel the rib cage going behind, and then the head pulling back a bit. And we want to show how the muscles coming off the chest, the pectoralis, are pulling up. Now, feel the flow up. Again, very, very simple, focusing on the gesture, going over the surface of the form. Through. Now, it's a very tricky pose here, and the way the pelvis is actually taking and turning, coming across. You're going to feel the pull. That leg is coming across, pulling through, go over the surface. Again, exactly the way I was drawing with the pen. No different. And notice also the way I hold the pencil. I'm taking, and it's my fingers don't move. It's my arm that takes and moves. Again, Michelangelo said the artist doesn't draw with his hands. He takes and draws with his brain. Okay, so now at this point, I've got it coming down. Now I'm going to take and carry this a little bit farther. Feel the head has dropped lower. Feel the bandana here around the eyes, nose. Now I'm thinking of where the 7th cervical vertebrae is. Back, come through. Feel the scapula pushing up. Feel the building up. But to take and first, I want to get that rib cage really pulling through. So as I go from one side, I follow through to the other side. I really don't see very much of it, or actually practically almost none of the rib cage on the other side. But I want to feel how this is now fitting into the waist. We can feel the scapula. I should see the pelvis is sticking up. And we can feel the pinch. So I'm focusing on the pinch. Feel we're coming around the form, going over the surface of the form, coming through. It's going behind. Now we come back out to the knee, going across the condyles. And we feel the pull coming through. Pinch, compression, come through. So I'm very much focused on the how the parts relate to each other. Coming through, feel the leg coming out again, going across the form, going through. And now we need to get that scapula sticking up. Now here I'm going to take and deviate a little bit from the pose, like I'm really pushing that scapula out. I want to feel the neck coming out from in between the rib cage to take and give it a little bit more emotional content to it. The breasts are down here, and I would be pushing the rib cage a bit more. Then coming down, looking to where the elbow's at, and I'm hitting a point. Then I will follow this back up, coming through, picking up where the deltoid comes down, through, and here it's important to show. Now you can see that show that that elbow is not on the ground. So to do that, this would be like having feet. You take and throw a shadow underneath just to show that it's not on the ground. So the point there is that you're giving information. Okay? So we can feel the head's back a little bit farther more down. Now, as I go back into this, now I can come through and I'll push. I want to give a little bit more strength to that for myself. As I'm doing this, this is feeling these forms come through. We can start to feel the pinch of the forms going behind. So I would take and actually create lines that don't exist on the model. In fact, the model doesn't have lines. She has forms, and this part of the idea is that instead of copying forms, I take and create forms, I should say contours. Instead of copying contours, I create forms that create contours. So I come through and feel this pinch a bit more, coming across and emphasize the corner of that knee a little bit stronger, coming through. Well, over, pull, cross. Foot's really turned in here, so I want to go thinking I'm going across that form, going back in, and feel the heel. Think of the Achilles tendon there, and start coming across with the foot here, the heel coming through. Now, here I would use the basically the shadow we see in the model is a means of helping to show the roundness of the form. We're coming around through. Just keep in mind now that there aren't any rules, that everything is, you have a series of basic tools that you use, and they will be varied and changed and adjusted according to the needs of the drawing at the moment. Through. Now, push stronger. You pull down. Okay. Now that you've gone through and watched me doing these drawings, it's not magic, it's practice.